topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Hello and welcome to the Connected Table Live. We're your hosts, Melanie Young and David Ransom, your insatiably curious culinary couple. We love to travel the world to bring you the dynamic people we meet in wine, food, spirits, and hospitality. We love sharing their stories with you and the places we visit with you. David, where are we today? Virtually.
Virtually, that's Mount Etna in the background.
Yeah, high up in Mount Etna.
And very high up above the tree line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is where we were in 2022 with our guest today.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's setting this up. So we were there for Etna Days, learning about Etna wines. Etna is a still active, very active volcano. And we've had the great honor of going there, I think, 2 or 3 times to try the amazing wines. And we're going to talk about volcanic wines today because volcanic soils account for only about 1% of the world's Earth's surface. However, they really account for an amazing amount of fantastic wines with very unique characteristics. In fact, we were just in Hawaii on the island of Maui, which has a volcano, Haleakala, and AVA, Hawaii's first. And I'm probably going to butcher the name.
And I think only.
Ulupalakua or Ulapalakua. Whichever, and it's an AVA in Hawaii. And people go, they make wine in Hawaii?
They do. Actually, there's one winery there, and it was originally founded as Tedeschi Winery in 1973, I think it was. So they've been around a long time. And I remember going to tastings back in the day when I'd go to tastings to pour my own wine, and sometimes Tedeschi would be there pouring their wines. And I was fascinated by the fact that they could even make wine on Hawaii, because I always thought of it as a very tropical isle with palm trees and a humid climate, etc. But they've been making wine there for a long time.
No, Haleakala is high elevation and cool, and it has these volcanic soils. So we're going to talk about this topic and some places that you would never think are volcanic in geography and make amazing wines with our guest, John Szabo, who is the founder and chief wine critic at WineAlign, Canada's largest wine magazine. Like the biggie. He has been a Master Sommelier since 2004 and was Canada's first Master Sommelier. We have traveled with John a couple of times now, mainly in Italy, well, probably only in Italy, and definitely in Etna, and most recently in Campania, another amazing volcanic wine region. Yeah. John is prolific on the topic and author of a book called Volcanic Wines, Salt, Grit, and Power. It's won a lot of awards. He's working on an update. It's so fantastic. So we'll let him show the book because it'll show up better on his screen. But we want to welcome to the Connected Table, John Szabo, Master Sommelier.
Hello, friends. Thanks for having me on.
Good to see you.
Lovely
nice
to see you.
See you without your travel hat and you're probably one of the most dapper travelers that we know, besides your cohort, Michael Goodell. You two really represent Canada well.
Brilliant, thank you.
Although Michael wears more plaid, I think.
Yeah, more plaid.
Flannel shirts.
So we learned before we were coming on air that your name is Hungarian. So that's your roots are Hungarian. There's a Hungarian chapter in the book. Give us a sense of your family and your background.
Well, I was born in and grew up in Toronto. My father was born in Budapest. He left, like so many thousands of Hungarians, in 1956, just after the failed revolution against the Russians, or the Soviets back then. Ended up in Canada, where he met my mother, and that's why I was born in Toronto, and grew up in that sort of mixed family.
David, have you been to Toronto?
Many, many, many times. My parents are both from Buffalo, so we used to go over to Niagara Falls all the time and go to a place called Shirkston Quarry to go swimming. And I think they had an amusement park there too, which was in Ontario as well, along Lake Erie. But we went to Toronto a lot. And I have friends that live up there as well. Not John.
Well,
I
I
know
went
you do.
once for work and I visited my client was Movenpick. Do you remember Movenpick?
Oh, of course, yeah.
Yeah,
Legendary
that was my
moment.
client.
Oh, I've been there for that restaurant too.
It
That
was
was
like
great.
awesome.
Yeah.
But I didn't know. That's my only context with Toronto, and I'm dying to go back. Is there a large Hungarian community there and in Canada?
Yeah, there is still a massive Hungarian community. In fact, when I was at University of Toronto, all Hungarians play water polo. I played water polo, and we had the all Hungarian U of T water polo team. We'd confuse our opponents by speaking Hungarian in the water. Brilliant tactic.
Do you still speak Hungarian?
I do, yeah. I mean, it's a tough language. If you've ever looked into it, it's kind of its own language group. But I can, I can get along. Just got back from Budapest. In fact, I was there for the Hungarian Wine Summit, where I did a seminar masterclass on volcanic wine of all topics. Can you imagine?
Imagine that. So tell us how obviously you're from Toronto. You were born and raised there. What got you interested in wine originally? And tell us about the path to becoming Canada's first Master Sommelier.
All right. Well, I'll give you the brief version. My first interest in love was with food more than wine. I mean, my father always had wine around the house, but nothing really special at all. It usually came in a box, and he'd have a glass or two here and there. Didn't really have much interest in it. But eating, on the other hand, I love flavors. I love textures. I love, I learned to cook because of that. So my career actually started off in restaurants, but not like many sommeliers on the front of the house side. I was in the back of the house. I worked in kitchens in Toronto, and then in Niagara wine country, and then ended up in France, all the while, being exposed to fine wine along the way, and becoming a little bit more and more curious about it as I went along. So when I was in France, in Paris, I ended up doing this wine course, a sort of in-depth French wine program, 5 days a week, all day. I would do that, and then I would go work in restaurants at night, and sort of fell, like so many of us, for the world of wine and the possibilities it offered. So did a few other things, ended up importing wine, then carried on studying. I did my WSET diploma just so I could brush up, did the Canadian Sommelier Guild diploma, and a friend of mine suggested, well, why don't you take a run at this Master Sommelier exam? I said, what's that? Who are they? Tell me more. This was back in the early 2000s. Nobody in Canada had ever heard of the Court of Master Sommeliers. Anyhow, I looked into it and ended up doing my advanced, and then a year and a half later, I passed the MS in 2004.
That's pretty good, because it's one of those tests that you can also take a lot, like the bar. So did you have to write a thesis? And if so, what was it?
There's no thesis part of the MS exam. The MW, actually, I started doing the MW and the MS at the same time.
Okay.
Ended up happening to pass the MS first. So I thought, okay, it's time to get serious and maybe do some work, not just study my life away, although I would have been happy doing that. So no thesis required, but I eventually became a writer, moving out of restaurants altogether. And I love sharing the stories. I think like any writer, painting pictures with words and sharing background stories, teaching in a sort of passive and friendly way is a great joy for me.
Well, as we all know, writing about wine can be challenging these days. You are in a really great position because WineAlign is a very large, well-read outlet. Tell us about it, because obviously we have here in the United States, Wine Spectator, Wine Enthusiast, Wine Advocate. I was just reading about Jeb Dunnick. I finally figured out who the hell he was, and now we're going to put him on the show. And there's a lot of interesting people, but we're less familiar here about what's going on in Canada. And it's an amazing large wine market, first of all, with some wonderful wine writers. We've met several on our trips. Tell us about WineAlign and
Canada. Well, I guess the first thing to share is that Canada is actually not one country. It's 10 countries and a couple of territories, because every province operates its own alcohol distribution system. It's sort of like your Pennsylvania, but in every state. Imagine that. So WineAlign is based in Ontario. We've got about 10 million people. So even Ontario on its own is quite a big market. It's the biggest province in the country. And we focus, WineAlign started in 2008, late 2008. So we've been around for a while. And at that point, print already didn't make sense. So we were an online publication from the start. And the main idea was to become a glorified shopping tool. If we break it down to its essence, connecting readers with the wines that they could find, the best wines that we tasted at the local monopoly. We call it the LCBO, the Liquor Control Board of Ontario. And then we expanded outside of Ontario into Quebec and BC mainly. And now we've got readers all over the world, of course, because the wines are not only available in Canada, they're available in many other markets around the world. So, I mean, the concept is that we're multiple critics. So it's not just me. We're sort of 5 principal critics at WineAlign. We all taste independently, review independently, so that you as a reader, you can look up a wine, you'll see 3 or 4, maybe 5 different reviews on it. Sometimes we agree, sometimes we don't agree, but the idea is that you align with the critic whose tastes best match yours. That's the concept behind WineAlign. So, you taste a wine and I rated it very highly, and my colleague Sarah rated it a little less highly, and you think, wow, this is a terrible wine. What was John thinking? I'm going to align with Sarah because her tastes are much more in line with mine. So this for me is the great freedom. Being a critic can sometimes be a challenge when you try to be everything to everyone. I think it's futile to even attempt to do that. So I can be myself. I can love the wines that I want to love, and then either we align or we don't align.
And for anyone interested in looking at the site, it's WineAlign, ALIGN.com. And you can see the critics there. You co-host also Wine Thieves, a podcast with one of the critics, Sarah D'Amato. I think your concept of aligning with a critic and taste is interesting because, as you know, back in the day, everybody was like following Robert Parker, and there was the Parker palate. And then there was a lot of criticism about wineries trying to tailor the wines for the Parker palate to get better scores. How would you describe your palate, your tasting palate and approach?
Well, I think it's fair to say that, we all evolve. So the wines that I loved 20 years or so ago are not necessarily the ones that I gravitate towards today. For example, personally, I drink probably about 80% white wine, which is often surprising for many people. Like, what? Isn't red wine more serious? Aren't serious wine people into red wine more than white? And my answer is, well, no. I mean, white wines give me as much joy and pleasure as anything. I like the freshness. I like acidity. I like vibrancy. I like non-fruity wines. That's my favorite request. Walking to a restaurant, I'll call the sommelier over and say, bring me your least fruity wine. I want 0 fruit. And that usually causes a little, really, sir? Is that what you want?
No fruit and lots of acid.
Which, volcanic wines happen to be a lot of the time. Maybe my palate has gravitated towards the volcano. Salty, gritty wines, fruitless and stony.
It could be your personality, but we know your personality is
not
just that.
I think it depends on what your diet is too, as to whether you drink more red or white wine as well.
Yeah, because our theory is in the United States, I'm sure in Canada, a lot of people are having more Mexican food and Asian food and foods that naturally gravitate toward having and a lot of spicy foods. And some of the whites are just terrific. We eat a lot of sushi here. Although we did an article on red wine and sushi, people tend to gravitate toward white wines. Also, I have a theory that climate change is turning us to white wines.
Yeah,
we live in New Orleans. It's hot. Like, we have friends like, please don't serve us red wine. We can't take it. They want bubbles or white.
A couple of ice cubes go a long way when you get served that.
That's so true.
Or fruity reds, lighter reds. Yeah, I mean, I think the climate change is impacting that as well. But so obviously you like to write about volcanic wines. Are there other, in terms of what you like to cover, and what got you into volcanic wines? What were you enjoying writing about? Because everybody has things they like to write about. I mean, David writes about, for his magazines, Toward the Trade. I tend to like to write about people who are planning to go somewhere and want to learn what to expect and where to go and how to eat. What do you, when you picture your avatar reader, who are they and what are they liking to read about that you write?
I think my writing is directed towards, obviously, people who are quite into wine, who love wine. They don't necessarily need to be so-called experts, but sometimes I get a little technical. But that's my background. I studied science. I studied language. I like to dig deep into the subject. And for the record, I should say that I do drink other than volcanic wines. That's the problem. You write a book about a subject and you're forever intimately linked to that, but I've got time for all sorts of soil types. You know, give me a good limestone, give me a good granite, a schist. I'll enjoy wines from any of those soils. I just happened to fall into this volcanic wine world kind of accidentally. I'll tell you how it happened. About 15 or so years ago, an editor of mine asked me to do one of these end of the year kind of light articles, write a paragraph about your favorite wine. So there I was at my desk trying to be a little more clever than the average. What am I going to write about? Champagne, Burgundy, Brole, you know, all the things that folks already knew. So I started to think about some areas that I'd recently visited, some interesting wines. And I happened to have just visited Etna. I'd recently been to Santorini. I'd been back in Hungary, tasting some wines there on the north shores of Lake Balaton and up in Tokaj. And finally, it dawned on me that the only thing that kind of related all of these totally disparate regions was the fact that they were volcanic regions, volcanic soils. So I thought, okay, I'm going to be tongue-in-cheek, and wrote my little paragraph saying my favorite wine, you know, it grows on the side of a volcano. And the editor read this and she said, that's an interesting concept. Could you maybe produce a full-length article? I thought, I don't know, let me look into it. And I did. And then that's when I started to scratch a little deeper beneath the surface and realized there's an amazing world of volcanic wines out there. It's not nearly as niche as it sounds off the top. I mean, it sounds like a completely niche category of volcanic wines, but if you think about it, it covers pretty much every major wine growing continent. I'm talking hundreds of different grape varieties, every imaginable climate from Hawaii to Patagonia, you know, so it's a pretty massive world. And yeah, I wrote a nice big article, and then I thought maybe there's a whole book in there. And in fact, there was. A few years later, this little beauty came out.
We have our own copy in front of us too. It's a little messy. It's a hefty book.
Yeah, it's a little messy. It's like dog-eared. It's been a great reference book.
It has been.
When writing, and we like. Well, I've had a fascination with volcanoes ever since I spent New Year's Eve looking at Tumalal in Chile, gazing into the crater and realizing I could die or get off the. It was like burping in my face, salt and everything. And then they pushed me to go down the mountain. That was how we went down. They pushed me, and I body toboggan down. But I've had a fascination. And then we had the chance to go to Etna. We've been to Vesuvius. We were just in Orvieto, which, you know, what's amazing is a lot of people don't realize that there are parts of the world where they may not see a volcano, but it's volcanic.
Yes, indeed. I mean, yeah, the picture you have behind you is the poster child region for volcanic wines, because Etna seems to erupt every other week. I mean, we've probably seen some eruptions while we're there.
It's constantly in motion. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
But listen, I'm not a geologist, but my definition for a volcanic wine, that's the first thing people ask me, well, what is a volcanic wine? It's simply a wine made from grapes grown on soils derived from volcanic material. And that volcanic material could be, you know, 3-day-old ash on the slopes of Mount Etna, or it could be 300-million-year-old lava flows that have degraded into beautiful soil like you have in parts of northern Italy. And that, for me, all qualifies as volcanic.
Exactly.
And as Millie, as you pointed out, there's volcanic soil in so many places around the world that you might not know are volcanic soil, because you don't think of that region as being volcanic. It's really fascinating. When we were in Orvieto, they were talking about an eruption that had taken place in that region that created volcanic soil there. And we were like, well, where's that? And it happened to be the lake next to Orvieto, which was the water-filled crater now.
Yeah.
That really created all the volcanic soils in that region that you'd never know.
Lake Bolzano, which is the largest volcanic.
And it happens all over the place.
Lake.
John, as you were doing your research, what were some of the surprising takeaways that you found as you were creating and putting the book together?
One of the things that really surprised me, like you, lots of areas you didn't know are volcanic, was just the sheer diversity of places, but also grape varieties. And not only that, but strangely enough, in so many parts of the volcanic world, well, there's no phylloxera for one, which means that old, ancient, indigenous varieties tended to survive and are still around. as opposed to having been ripped out and replanted with Cabernet and Chardonnay back in those crazy 80s when everything was Chardonnay and Cabernet. The Canary Islands is a brilliant example of this. And this is an archipelago that was settled in the 1500s by the Spanish, or by Iberians, I should say, who brought with them all of their grape varieties from home, because that's what a good 16th century sailor does. They need wine when they arrive. And they brought all of these varieties that subsequently went extinct on the mainland when phylloxera came in and wiped everything out in the late 19th century. So Canaries is like this Jurassic Park of about 80 different varieties, many of which you wouldn't find anywhere else on the planet other than there, because they survived. And this pattern kind of repeated all over the place. We were just in Campania, how many fantastic varieties are still around that the Romans were planting 2,000 years and even before that. And thankfully, those grapes have survived, and they give this amazing richness of diversity and flavors in that world.
Something you describe in the book, just defining the character. The soils are diverse, and the types of volcanoes are very different. We've learned, and you've explained, and we'll ask further. Eruptions are all different, and they create different debris, as we say. But you do say that there are some common characteristics about volcanic wines, and one of them was the savory character.
Yes. So, I mean, if we wanted to divide the vast world of wine into two kind of hemispheres, on the one hand, you'd have your fruity wines, and the other hand, you'd have your more savory wines. Obviously, there's overlap between the two, but more often than not, I would say 99 times out of 100, wines grown in volcanic soils fall on the savory side of the spectrum.
And why is that?
Why is that? Well, that's a $10 million question. I don't think even $1 million would cover that. The answer is complex, of course, but I'll break it down as simply as I understand it to be. And there's nothing simple about this world. Volcanic soils differ, even in the vast range of volcanic soils themselves. They all come from magma, which has erupted or come onto the Earth's surface. Magma's got different composition, but by and large has a huge range of micro and macro elements. So pretty much everything a vine needs is in all types of volcanic soil, from basalt through to rhyolites, which means that the vine has access to essential nutrients. Now, if it were too available, then you'd have super fertile soils, and you'd have big vigorous canopies, and probably pretty dilute, uninteresting wine. So, I mean, there are volcanic soils all over the world, but they're not all good for grape growing to make quality wine. In the tropics, for example, plenty of great volcanic soils in Costa Rica, for example. There they make great coffee, but not so much great wine. Climate being one, but the soils are too fertile. So the best volcanic soils tend to be younger, rockier, not very fertile, with low water availability, which means that those elements that are all in the soil can't be dissolved and taken up by a root system. So the vine is kind of semi-parched, the water availability is low. All the elements are there. It gets a little bit of everything, a broad diet, but still remains low vigor, which ends up being smaller bunches, smaller berries, more skin than juice in many cases, which translates into concentrated flavors. Mm-hmm. Maybe that sounds all a little complicated, but just think of struggling vines. We know that struggling vines tend to produce more interesting wines, and vines in volcanic soils, which are also acidic for the most part, make it a challenge for the vine, which is good for us.
It's all very interesting. You talk about volcanic soil, but one of the things that volcanic soil does is break down over time and become a different type of soil, but still volcanic. But the older it is, and with no eruptions on top of it, the more of a chance it has to break down. Is there in your research and in your travels, have you found a volcanic soil age requirement that produces the best type of wines out of it?
That's a great question. I don't know if I can answer that. It has to be probably at least 50 or 100 years old, depending on the climate. They say on Mount Etna, for example, that the first things that start to grow in a fresh lava flow is the ginestra, that beautiful yellow flower. So on a young volcanic flow, nothing will grow for, probably 10, 20, 30 or so years. So it has to have weathered into some amount of soil, can't just grow in a rock.
Right.
So there's a, sort of minimum age requirement. Maximum age, I haven't found. There's some beautiful, rich red Jory soils in the Willamette Valley, for example, that produces some absolutely fabulous Pinot Noir there. Those are about 16 million year old soils, and they're older, and there's everything in between. So, I wouldn't want to hem myself in with a time frame, because it really depends on the type of lava and the climate. In a tropical climate, soil forms much more quickly. On the island of Santorini, for example, those are 3,600 year old soils, if you can call them that. Such a dry island that there's zero clay, there's zero organic matter, no real soil is formed. Those vines grow in a pitifully poor ash.
It's almost like walking on a moonscape.
You write about, we've been to Santorini, and you write about, we saw as well some of the most interesting calderas. I mean, basically, Santorini is a caldera.
It is indeed
exactly what it is.
And it's quite remarkable. You talk about a conference there, and it's really exquisite. But a lot of people may not realize, there's a section on the Pacific Northwest and Northern California, and you don't necessarily equate them with equators and earthquakes, but you don't think about the volcanic history of these areas. I'm curious, that's much further away than Santorini and Italy and the Canaries, how they're different region by region. Are the volcano compositions different? That would make the Willamette and basically the Pacific Northwest and Northern California unique in different ways.
That might be useful to point out where and why volcanoes occur.
Right.
And I'm sure you know this, probably most of the listeners as well. But if you picture the surface of the Earth, it's not one solid sphere. It's actually composed of different tectonic plates, about 8 major plates and literally hundreds of smaller plates, microplates. And the vast majority of earthquakes and volcanoes occur on those plate boundaries. All right. So take the Pacific Basin as a great example. You've got this massive Pacific plate that's bouncing into all of the surrounding land masses from New Zealand all the way around 40,000 kilometers, 25,000 miles, down around to the other side to Patagonia in Chile. And as one plate hits another, you get what's called a subduction zone. One plate gets dragged underneath. One of those has got a wind. That plate sinks deeper and deeper into the Earth's core, gets hotter, melts, and about 100 miles, 50 miles from that subduction zone, you get an arc of volcanoes as that magma wells up and has to find its way up to the surface. So you get mountain formation and volcanic formation on those subduction zone edges. So that's the Andes Mountain. They're not all volcanoes, but there are hundreds kind of scattered in there. Up a little closer to where you are, there's the Sierra Nevada. 300 million years ago, that would have been a hypervolcanic area, but the volcanism has kind of moved further north. That's why further north, and certainly up into Alaska, you've got a whole bunch of active volcanoes. So that's more or less where they occur. There's some other mysterious ones, like where you just were in Hawaii. Hawaii is an island sitting smack dab in the middle of that plate, that Pacific plate. Why is there a volcano there? Well, it's still a bit of mystery to geologists, but
thin crust.
It's a thin crust. The crust is thinned out for reasons we don't really understand, and that allows magma to come up and erupt into lovely volcanoes. So in Hawaii and in Stromboli and even Etna there, you get these wonderful effusive, it's called an effusive eruption. Lava kind of bubbles out there. You get these curtains, these fountains. That's basalt for the most part, which is a very viscous type of lava, which kind of flows and moves very slowly. Compared to at the other end of the volcanic spectrum, you get these massive, they're called Plinian eruptions after Pliny the Younger, who described in horrific detail the eruption of Vesuvius in 79 AD. I mean, it's actually a fabulous read. He goes into amazing detail, but that is the sort of massive column of smoke that rises tens of kilometers into the air. Mount St. Helens, I guess, would have been a pretty recent example in 1980, was it, in Pacific Northwest? So that's another type of lava called rhyolite for the most part, which is much more viscous and takes a lot more energy to erupt. So when it erupts, that baby goes. So those are
And
your,
it did.
those are your
And
two main types.
don't wait around to watch it.
So there's Plinian, and then what was the other one called?
It's called Hawaiian or Strombolian,
Strombolian.
or
Yeah,
effusive.
that was something that was kind of an interesting takeaway when we were traveling,
Yeah.
the different types. When we were in the Big Island, obviously there's a massive and still active volcano there. And we walked on the crunchy lava fields, which are very different. Okay, the crunchy lava fields of Hawaii, Kilauea, and volcanoes versus the incredibly sandy soils that are pictured behind us in Etna when we took that tour, which was you can do it for anyone interested. You can. There are many day trips up to Etna by Jeep. Sometimes there's like this little airlift thing, but it was too windy. You sink into those. It's sandy,
But it's a coarse gravelly sand.
coarse
It's very
gravelly, but
Yeah.
like gravel sand to me is what it felt like walking on the thickest beach.
Yeah, I mean, you get a little bit of both there on Etna. If you've seen the massive hardened lava flows, some of which happen to flow right in the middle of a vineyard, and vines on either side, and you get along with that a ton of ash. So they say in Etna, when the smoke is white, that's okay. That's mostly just steam, and it's almost continuously emitting steam. When it turns blue or black, that's when you got to be a little bit more weary about what's coming next. And winemakers describe, that black ash falling like rain, gumming up your windshield, getting on vine leaves, stopping photosynthesis. That's a whole different hazard of living and growing grapes on the side of a volcano.
Interesting.
We asked a lot of the producers that they don't seem to, when we were there last year.
Yeah, it was last fall.
Etna had just exploded. So around Catania, there was ash everywhere, like all over black. And we saw, the remains of old, like old little palmetto that had just fallen into whatever it was covered by ash. And we asked, no one seems to care. It's life. It's the Italian. That's life. You live on a volcano. That's life. And it's amazing.
I remember asking a producer on the slopes of Vesuvius when I was researching the book. We go into his little cellar and I see the scratching on the wall. It says 1740 or something. I said, oh, when's that? I said, oh, that's when the cellar was dug out by my great grandfather, whatever it was. He said, but we've had to dig it out a few times since. I said, what do you mean? Well, it's a live, active volcano. The last major eruption, 1944 was a little minor one, but 1906, I think it was, enough of a mud flow came in, filled out the cellar. So what do? Well, they, get the shovels, dig it out again.
Dig it out. Yeah.
I said, so what's it like? I mean, knowing that your entire life's work and multi-generations behind you could be wiped out in a flash. I mean, wouldn't you want to go somewhere else? And he said, Ma Giovanni, where do I go? This is my home. This is my place. This is where I love to be. This is where I love to grow grapes. I love the wine I make. And I thought, well, yeah, I guess there are hazards no matter where you are. Maybe a little bit more obvious in some volcanic regions, but where are they going to go?
I'm wondering, when we all left Campagna Stories, we were there in June, right?
Mm-hmm.
There was activity in the Campo Flegrei area and in Vesuvius afterwards. I started to feel like everywhere we go, activity starts in volcanoes after we leave. You don't, unfortunately, there was geological teams and scientists that help predict all that. But everywhere people were saying a big one's coming, coming.
Maybe we're the accidental volcano whisperers.
People just have to be prepared. I mean, there's a lot of science that goes into predicting eruptions, and yet they erupt.
Well, I tell you, when the Campi Flegrei goes, hopefully not for a long time, but it's going to be absolute total chaos because it's right in the Bay of Pozzuoli. I mean, right in Naples. Yeah. 3 million people living there. And I remember chatting with some locals. They said, there's lots of provisions in place, but you can't make the roads any wider. I mean, you can't shut down shops. You can't stop life. Life goes on. And, so it must.
A region you cover, and you're clear in the intro to the book, there's many regions you could not cover yet. I mean, I can only imagine what's going on in Asia. and and even more of South America. I mean, you tip of the southern hemisphere. But you talk about Alsace in Germany, which was interesting. We have not spent any time in Hungary, where you have familiar roots. We've spent minimal time in Alsace, even though we've done some podcasts with Alsatian producers. 0 in Germany and Hungary. What are the so we don't really know anything about the volcanoes, even the names of them. Are they dormant? Talk to us about that area. And how are those wines, which are very unique and different from the ones we were talking about in Italy, impacted by the soils?
All right. So, I mean, we're talking about subduction zone. That's where most volcanoes occur. But the other place is divergent boundaries. So when plates are moving apart from one another, as they do that, the crust stretches and gaps appear, and that's when volcanoes form. So the entire Rhine Valley, you have volcanoes that appear here and there, with no regularity. I guess the most notable volcanic area is in Germany, called the Kaiserstuhl in southern Baden, and those are pretty serious volcanoes, extinct now, long extinct. But the very southern tip of Alsace, the Rongen du Tan Grand Cru, that's one of these little areas that
we've been on that hill.
That's where we've been.
And
were the wines good, my friends? I mean,
they were very good.
We did a picnic there.
It's one of the great crus of Alsace.
It was incredible.
And a very steep hill too, by the way.
We did a picnic right there with the importer and his team and the wines. It was a highlight.
Yeah. I wonder if you knew you were on an old volcano at that point.
I think we were told. Yeah.
Anyway,
it's interesting to find where volcanic regions are that you don't expect.
Well, that's what I'm getting to, is like, you don't think about them if you're just out there looking around. And I did Google like the world's top volcanoes to see what there was. But that was kind of and Germany and Hungary, we didn't think about those as volcanic, and you're saying they are, and probably the same tectonic plates, because they're kind of there.
But what I would suggest, and I found this extremely educational and fun, is to go to areas of mixed geology and do comparisons, because then you really get a sense of, okay, what does the volcanic soil give versus the sandstone, the limestone. So Germany is a great place to do that, because there aren't that many volcanic vineyards. There's a few, like the Forster Pechstein and Forst down in the Pfalz, and one little sliver of the Mosel, the Erziger Würzgarten. So little vineyards here and there. And there's a professor at Neustadt University named Dr. Uli Fischer, actually did some comparative tastings of Riesling, which we all know is a super transparent variety, reflects its origins pretty nicely. So he did a comparison of Rieslings from vineyards adjacent to one another, one sandstone and one basalt. And then he did a comparison of 2 volcanic Rieslings, but from opposite ends of the country. So way up in the Mosel and way down in the Pfalz. And I mean, obviously the climate is not that similar when you're that far away, but he found that the flavor profile of the Rieslings miles apart were more similar than the Rieslings that grew next to one another, but on different soil. So, not that we didn't know this, but soil makes a big difference, and it does change the flavor profile. The acidity was a little bit lower in the volcanics. Not that surprising. When you've got dark volcanic soil, you absorb a little more sunlight, soils warm up, grapes tend to ripen a little bit higher. Another little maybe technical aside there, but I think it's kind of fun. Maybe your listeners won't think it's so fun, but I'm a bit of a chemistry geek, is that volcanic soils tend to have high potassium. And in the world of chemistry, potassium is an acid buffer. It makes acids less acidic. It sort of softens them out. So when you grow on volcanic soils, you tend to have a lot of potassium in your must, in your juice, which lowers the acidity, raises the pH, and changes the dynamic in the mouth. But that being said, I like acid, even though sometimes, technically speaking, the acids are relatively low. Volcanic wines tend to have this freshness because of another little theory of mine, which is saltiness. And
Mm-hmm.
you know, saltiness is the new minerality. Everyone's talking about the salinity of their wines, the
Mhm.
salinity of their wines. I'm glad, because I've been talking about it for 15 years. I thought maybe I was crazy, but everyone else is catching on. But I'm quite convinced, and still more research required, but there tends to be this sensation of saltiness in volcanic wines. Sometimes it's just plain old sodium chloride, like a seaside vineyard in the Canaries actually has measurably higher sodium chloride, table salt, from the sea spray, not from the soils. But inland areas like in Germany or Hungary, for example, the saltiness comes from, I would say, different mineral salts. So magnesiums and potassium salts, these sort of things that have a salty taste, but also a bitter taste. So this is where the non-fruitiness comes into play here. Tends to emphasize that bitter, salty, savory, as opposed to the fruity side of things.
Well, that's why the book is Volcanic Wines: Salt, Grit, and Power. And I know when we travel, salinity is frequently in my tasting notes, particularly a lot of the wines from the sea area, particularly in Sicily and in southern France, and a lot of that sapidity you get the salt and the minerality and a little stoniness. And I like savory wines. I adore them. And it's definitely my flavor profile, which is why sometimes we haven't been to Northern California enough lately, but that's why I'm mentally grappling with, because to me, the California wines we've tasted from Napa and Sonoma are so distinct, and I don't get any of that in them. Well, more Sonoma than Napa. So we have to go out and do some revisit, because I'm not there. For me, the least likely to feel that volcanic characteristic that I'm used to in other areas.
Well, listen, as a winemaker, you can also do all sorts of things to
Right.
shape the profile of a wine. And of course, if you let your Cabernet ripen to 28 bricks and then water it back, and
Yeah.
you're going to kind of beat the volcanic essence out of it. But go, next time you're there, go up to the Mayacamas side, the eastern side of the Napa Valley, up to like Pritchard Hill, Atlas Peak. Those are pretty volcanic areas, and the growers will tell you what a pain in the ass it is to do anything there. I mean, tractors are breaking all the time. It's just chunks of volcanic stone, and you taste those wines versus, say, something down on the valley floor, Cabernet, same producer, you get a radically different profile.
Well, I think that's what we prefer, mountain wines from California.
Oh,
always. And well, we like, let's talk about the Southern Hemisphere.
Well, before we go there, I want to
okay.
just make one note. It's interesting about that you're talking about Napa and Sonoma too, because there's a lot of volcanic soil out there, but there's also a lot of other soil out there. And I was actually just doing a series of articles with a winery in Sonoma that actually that straddles two AVAs, and one is Chalk Hill, and then the other is Russian River Valley. So one's volcanic and the other sedimentary, and they're very different wines, both grown on the same property.
Yeah, the not so well named Chalk Hill. It's not limestone at all. It's volcanic ash. It looks kind of chalky because it's white volcanic ash.
So let's switch. So South America, I've been to Chile, not to any of the wine regions. I've been everywhere, but I went to the volcanic region, Tumalal, and to the Atacama Desert, because I do have a thing for soil also. I like to try different areas. You cover some Southern Hemisphere, not a lot in the book, because that's a whole nother thing of traveling. What are some of your findings and takeaways from your travels that you've been there? Where would you like to go back and do some more field research?
Well, I mean, we could start in Chile, which is a country that is eminently volcanic, but only just starting to discover the potential of the volcanic terroirs for wines.
Right.
I mean, I remember one of my favorite stories from the book was traveling to Chile for the research and meeting with a guy named Pedro Para, who's kind of a self-styled terroirist, pretty famous consultant these days around the world. But I came down from Santiago. He came up from Concepcion. We met in Talca, somewhere in the middle. And I was very excited to speak to this expert on soils. We sat down. The first thing he says to me, "But John, why the volcanic soils? They are the worst soils in all of Chile for the wine." Fantastic. Yeah, it's a great start to my interview. And then he went on to explain in greater detail that, as we know, there are good volcanics and there are bad volcanics. Most of the good volcanics had yet to be exploited for wine, because those are usually way up in the Andes or way down south where, 15 years or so ago, nobody wanted to go. Everything was centered around Santiago. But now I'm delighted to see what's happening down in Itata, for example, even further south, where it starts to get super volcanic, again, towards the Andes. Some new projects that have just come online or just being planted. So I would put that high on my list of places to revisit for the volcanics. And then there are some countries that I simply didn't make it to because A, I didn't know they were volcanic, or B, I couldn't fit them all in. Japan comes to mind. I mean, I'd love to go to Japan and taste some of the koshu from the slopes of Mount Fuji. And huge parts of Romania that I haven't visited that are part of the same volcanic arc, continuing out of Hungary and down into the Dinarides. And where else? Central France. I've since been to the Auvergne, Côte d'Auvergne, and there's a new association called Loire Volcanique that has since emerged. But that whole the Massif Central of France, the center massif, is pretty much all old volcano. Where they grow some delicious lentils. You might have heard of the lentils from Dupuis, chain of volcanoes, and some terrific wines. Gamay, lovely Gamay. So lots of places. And then, of course, it was 10 years or so that the book came out, new producers, and wow, the world of wine changes. That's what keeps us in business.
It does. Do you feel that just speaking in generalized terms, do you feel that white grapes or red grapes take better to volcanic soils?
Yeah, that's a great and frequently asked questions. And I guess the obvious answer is that white wines tend to be, pun intended, a little bit more transparent and easier to read in terms of the volcanics. I mean, I would hate to say that, you won't find that in reds. Of course you do, but there's more going on in the sense of tannin, which can interfere or modulate that sensation that I describe as so volcanic. But there are plenty of savory reds. We were drinking some superb Alianicos, not so long ago in Campania from Taurasi, and those are pretty savory beauties, if you ask me. And
lovely wines.
And I think Campania has some of the most alluring wines for me personally. I mean, I love all Italian wines, but Campania is a discovery, region by region by region. Those indigenous groups are amazing. I think we'd like to both spend more time in South America, visiting the wine area, particularly Chile, also Argentina. We've interviewed a lot of Argentinian producers, but we've just spent no time there. Is Argentina have a volcanic? Because it's right there, but the Andes are over here, but there's mountains over there. But are they volcanic?
Yeah, I mean, that border, I don't know how it was drawn, right through the Andes. It seems that almost all the volcanoes fell on the Chilean side. As
it looks like it.
Maybe a couple parts in upper Mendoza you could claim are volcanic, but not nearly as uniform.
So we're getting toward we're almost at the end of our conversation. I'm curious. Two things. You kind of mentioned where you'd like to spend more time traveling, and we agreed Japan. I mean, somebody has just come out with a book with a massive chapter on Japanese wine. He's an MW. I saw it on LinkedIn, and I'm going to get it because it's like a whole nother world, almost a whole nother planet over there of what's going on that we want to try. You said you love savory wines. How would you describe your personality as a wine or wine grape?
We had this very same conversation in Hungary just a few days ago. What Hungarian variety would you be in?
Still fresh.
I think in the end we decided that I would be Furmint. A little spicy, kind of high acid, energetic, certainly savory more than fruity, a little botanical, kind of like an Amaro. I love drinking great Amaros as well, and Furmint has that botanic side. So yeah, but I would hate to be reduced to one single grape variety because me, I like diversity in the world of wine.
So you're like a Sybil, multi-personality when it comes to grape personalities.
Yeah, I'm a Gemini. At the very least, I've got to be at least a couple of different grapes.
Well, we'd love to end that with. People love that question. I've been asking people that. Besides, how do you get your teeth white for years? So we're really glad we nailed you down because you're always traveling.
As are we.
And we hope to be in the good fortune to be in your travel company again soon.
I'm sure we will cross paths, and thanks so much for having me on the show. Always a pleasure to speak with you too.
Absolutely. We've been talking with John Szabo. He is a master sommelier in Toronto, and his book is Volcanic Wines, Salt, Grit, and Power. It's been out for a while. You can get it. It's a terrific read and reference on some of the most fascinating volcanic wine regions of the world. And you should go to your local retailer and ask, can I try some wines from volcanic areas, so you can expand your palate and see for yourself what we're talking about, because we are all about making sure you eat, drink, explore, and always stay inspired and always stay insatiably curious. Thank you.